Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. The podcast features people who are doing it and is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, visit our website at greenpilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled Book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your GreenPilled.network chapter. My guest today is Dorian Taylor, who is a self-taught practitioner who grew up in Canada in the .com 1.0 era. At just the right age, at the right time, he went from pushing pixels running servers to programming infrastructure to UX design and experiencing what it's like to build the web from every angle while it's still possible to get one's arm around the entire thing in Web 1.0. He now helps clients with strategic planning, developing situational awareness, and the occasional heavy lift from there. The episode that we did today is an extension of the Summer of Protocols series that we've done, which again is an 18-week program, which is funded by the Ethereum Foundation. So we're taking a look at what would be true if we took a more protocol-centric view of history and human coordination, as opposed to agent-centric view of human coordination. The paper that Dorian wrote that will be released through the Summer of Protocols is called the Intertwingler, which is a software product that will be released in the not too distant future. So basically, I'd say that the thing that the Intertwingler does is it does hypertext right. So basically a way for ordinary websites to turn their content into a more semantic web version of their content. And those of you who have been following the evolution of the web for as long as I have might remember that the original Web 3.0 was a semantic web. This idea of ideas and concepts all being in XML or JSON structured data formats and being related to each other, which separates the presentation layer of the web to the actual content layer of the web. Why does that matter? Well, in a world in which the web is getting enshittified, that's Venkatesh Val's word that he talks about describing platform decay, a way to describe the pattern of decreasing quality of online platforms. Dorian is kind of fighting the enshittification of the web by using the Intertwingler, which is a tool which allows us to turn regular websites, enshittified websites, into a semantic web. And then from there, we can browse knowledge without advertisements and surveillance architecture and shitty user interfaces that have sort of evolved as the web has turned into a surveillance machine. So Dorian's kind of an eccentric autodidact. I think he's on kind of like a quixotic one-man mission to fix the web, and I admire that. I think that you might find Dorian, unless you're deeply technical and you think in systems, you might find Dorian like a little bit hard to understand at first. But I think that that's what happens when you're trying to understand people doing difficult things at the frontier of internet technology. So a lot of this episode, I think, is talking about the system dynamics, models and data behind the web, and then trying to build stories around them. Why is it important to have a more semantic web? How can we fight the enshittification of the web by using the Intertwingler? And so this is a unique episode. It's not like one that I think that we've done before, but that's what happens when we stretch ourselves, when we step outside of just Ethereum and dApps, people working in the Ethereum ecosystem, and into the Summer of Protocols, and see people like Dorian who are looking to push things forward. So this is a fun episode, and without further ado, I give you Dorian Taylor. Enjoy.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
Hey, how's it going?
Great, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really excited to have you on and to continue our series on the Summer of Protocols. I'm wondering if to start, you can bring us into the headspace of Summer of Protocols and what you were thinking about during the Summer of Protocols program.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've known Venkat Rao for a while, and he sort of came to me earlier this year and said, there's this thing that I'm working on, and you can apply to it. I don't have any say, but go ahead. And I managed to get a slot on this thing, which was an 18-week program starting in May, going through the end of August. Where a bunch of really genius people got together and sort of probed the essence of even sort of like a almost quasi-philosophical questions of like what protocols are. And that was my understanding was what the Ethereum Foundation was really after was language, like basically a rhetorical basis for expressing. And I mean, it really was like a think tank venture, as it were. And it was really kind of an interesting model, right? Like it's a sort of pop-up think tank. And I mean, I guess the community's really kind of got that pattern or not. I mean, if it's not on lock yet, it's getting there, where, you take a very modest amount of resources and you get a bunch of smart, sort of self-actualized, self-directed people and just say, go for it. Here's your prompt. Go nuts. So, I was really definitely excited to be a part of that, and I'm still working on the thing, but the output, which is a very cool thing. The sort of a binder that's happening. That's something you subscribe to, so you get the binder, the first installment, and then like every couple months or something like that, there's going to be one of our essays that goes out in it, plus a bunch of ancillary material, which is super cool. So it's like a physical artifact that's kind of coming out of this, in addition to all the rhetoric and all of the language that was really kind of, I mean, I think we really advanced some stuff too.
Yeah, the other guests we've talked about basically establishing, should this be a field, protocol studies, and what if we took a more protocol-centric view of human history instead of agent and institution-centric? And I think quite a weird headspace to get into, but it's the kind of thing where once I see it, I can't really unsee it. So it's been kind of fun to dive down that rabbit hole. And the brain power in the room when I was out there, I think was just immense. So it's been a really cool experience.
Totally. I mean, it totally reminds me of this conversation that was happening, like, I'm going to say like 13, 14 years ago, where the words user experience design, like, were kind of new. Before that, there was this like very concrete idea of information architecture and very concrete idea of interaction design. And like one was the declarative one, and the other one was the procedural one. And then they kind of like got amalgamated, sort of subsumed into this umbrella of UX. And that's what we talk about now. But at the time, it was a similar thing. Like, are there such thing as information architects, or is there just information architecture? So there was definitely a rhyme there. As you can tell, I'm old.
Yeah, as a elder millennial in the crypto space, I also feel like I'm getting up there. There was a time when I was the youngest person in every startup out there, but by the laws of entropy and the forwardness of time, people get older, and and maybe as Ethereum matures, protocols will be a field of study, just like how UX is something that people can specialize in today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is a headspace, like, because it's one thing to design a protocol in a context of a technical protocol, like the IP, stack or whatever. I actually was just reading a really interesting book on that. It was the biography of JCR Licklider, and it's kind of a history of the internet at the same time, and the sort of interaction with AI. So there's that aspect, and then there's the aspect of those sort of international relations, and how we're going to come up with a climate protocol, and sort of a policy law kind of angle of it too. But are they sort of, there's invariants that happen among protocols between those kinds of environments, this disciplines or whatever you want to call it. Like there's a lot of stuff that rhymes. There's a lot of the same stuff in there.
So we might not just have one field of protocol studies, but maybe several subfields in the future if protocols rule the world.
Yeah. I mean, what if you were to sort of like, you think about like cybernetics in the 40s and 50s, right? And 60s, I guess, and 70s, come to think of it. It kind of like died off with the first AI winter, I think, in the early 80s.
Yeah.
But cybernetics was a thing. And there was like general systems theory, and there was operations research, and there were all these sort of very very closely related, where they're looking at like systems, qua systems, as opposed to, particular kinds of systems. And I find, talking about systems to people, they're like, well, what kind of system? And you're like, any system, because it's a system. And then we're looking at the systemness of the system. You have that conversation, it goes back and forth. So, we're going to have a similar kind of thing with protocols, I think. It's going to be protocols for what? And it's like, God damn it. Protocols in general.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of circling your research here, but I'm wondering if you can take us deep. So tell us about your Summer of Protocols project, and I'm really interested to get into the Intertwingler. So let's go there.
Sure. So now this is something that goes back like a really long time for me. Like there's bits and pieces of this thing that that I can date at like 15 years old or something. Like they are real old. And I would consider myself, like I have a funny career. Like I started off as a visual designer, like in the .com 1.0 era. And then I like went deep into systems and infrastructure dev, and because it paid more, and like InfoSec and all that kind of stuff for like a chunk in my career. And then I kind of came back out again for the IA and UX and whatever land. But I've always had this kind of like infrastructure-y vibe, I guess. Even when I was doing visual design, I was like, the Polar Bear book from Lou Rosenfeld and Peter Morville was sort of, on my radar in, 2000, 2001. So, so I've always sort of had this infrastructure, and I've always been working with the web, since 15 years old, 15, 16. But what Intertwingler is, and this took me, and it tells me how deep in I was, because I got to the retreat in Seattle, and one of the other core researchers says, I have no idea what you're working on. And I'm like, I have spent so much effort trying to tell people what I've been working on. And it's like, you're a technical person, you understand stuff in general, and you don't understand this, then I have to basically retool it. So I would say the Intertwingler is this. It fills the space of basically WordPress, but it has nothing like WordPress. I was like thinking, it's like, is it more like Rails or Django? Like, is it more like a dev framework? Not actually. It's more like, it's what I've gone and done, is I've tried to make it so that if you've ever read Roy Fielding's REST paper, the dissertation, one of the core sort of ideas is this kind of layered system. You've got the Tim Berners-Lee stuff in there with the durable URLs. Durable URLs turns out to be like the most important thing. And I wrote this down in one of these places. It was like, it's very, very cheap to change the lexical content of a URL, like the string that is the URL. Very, very cheap to change that. Very, very expensive to change all of the places where that's written down. And that is basically the mechanism of why links break. And if you could fix that, that would just, what you would be able to do at that point is you would be able to shrink the size of the page into this entity that's just a whole snarl hairball of links, and then compose those together, reuse content. You could reverse proxy out to other things. There's sort of like this horizon of capability just opens right up, and this kind of like almost paradigm changing thing. So what I'm trying to do is shrink all the crap work to a point so that you can try more forms of like actual creative expression using hypermedia. And, like what if you had like an instance of this thing on your phone, and then, it, proxies over to like your hosting site, and then maybe that goes out onto IPFS or whatever, goes out on a CDN. There's like all of this kind of like, hey, what if we made the web Lego? And then, in a more Lego-y way than attempts to make it Lego have so far been. And, not thinking of it in terms of like yet another platform or dev platform, because part of the eventual ambition of this thing is that, people are going to write different versions of the same thing in different languages. And then it's going to basically have a protocol of sorts that, bolts everything all together. And then we're not talking about, again, crypto or anything like that at this stage, but we're talking about just like plain boring HTTP, HTML, and various other data structures. And so it's like, what can we do with that if the crap work of initially URLs was just taken off the table as something you had to worry about? You just didn't have to think about it. If you wanted it, you could add it, but you don't have to. And so that's really kind of the dumb, nexus of this entire thing. So yeah, that's an incredibly long-winded way to say that this is basically a thing for making websites, except the characteristics of the websites that it makes are completely unlike anything else out there.
So this is a thing that sort of the Intertwingler, I guess the subtitle is Retrofitting the Web. And so you're kind of ingesting URLs and transmitting them into a new form. And what does the new form have that's different or better than the traditional web?
So, I mean, it's for like making your own websites, right? So it's like, if you were going to make, like, you think about, Jekyll or, 11e, some of those things that are just like super straightforward and, they take a folder full of files and make a website. So the essence of it really is, if, you think about even like when you're making a website, you got a wiki or something like that even, and you're linking stuff, typing things out, and, you link things together and so on and so forth. And then like the overhead of that starts to add up. And, you kind of have to remember like what things are called and so on. So, at the center of this thing is it's just effectively a scheme or a policy, if you want to call it, or even a protocol if you want it, for, all right, so everything gets a canonical identifier. It gets a durable identifier that is the boss identifier that lasts forever. And then you get overlays on top of that for if you want this thing to be human readable, SEO friendly, whatever the hell, you can add that. And then you want to go change that. Well, then you change the overlay, but it remembers the old one. And the net effect of that is it turns out that when you make that part of the job just dirt friggin' cheap, then what you can do is you can crank up the sort of the density, what I'd call it dense hypermedia as opposed to sparse hypermedia. So take the median website, clip off the nav, clip off the footer or whatever, and then, scan what's left, scan the main content. And it's like, you might as well have paper because there's no links in there. And so vis-a-vis like retrofitting the web. So, there's a kind of laundry list of things like, there's not a lot of links to start with. The links are untyped. So like, you don't know what kind of thing it is you're linking. So let's say like the difference between, this, like you see like the little arrow that goes off to another website, for example, when it's an external link, or maybe like somebody's enterprising has gone and said, oh, this is a definition of a term or something like that. You can even think of like regular kind of arcs to go other places versus images that are embedded as kinds of links as well, because they are. You can just say like, here's a different processing expectation, put this here as opposed to go there. So there's this kind of, there's a vocabulary, and the vocabulary like out of the box is incredibly small as far as the web is. There is plunk thing on page versus go somewhere else. And that's pretty much it. And then, you can finagle it a little bit. Like you can use some CSS to make the little arrow if you go to an external site or whatever. So in this case, we're trying to regiment all that, trying to add to that vocabulary. And I mean, that's all stuff going back 20 years, semantic web stuff. That's very you just grab that off the shelf and use it. So there's that kind of an aspect of it. And I don't know what else you want me to say about that.
Yes.
There's just kind of like the species of links, the number of links, the sort of heterogeneity of links. Say you manage, we got a lot of links on this page. Well, what are they? It's like, oh, it's just like Twitter or something like that, or X. And it's just a long list of things. They're all the same. So your vocabulary, like they're kind of, the structure of a page is constrained by the kinds of things. If you've ever written like MVC web apps, like, you you've got a little thing in the corner, it's an inset, and like that might be a module in the template or something like that. It's like all of that information exists like in this kind of ocean of like not really anywhere. It's like kind of contingent on like hooking this file and hooking that file and this database record and so on. And the idea is really just to boil all that down to just like raw data. And then you can transform it on top because you have all the information that you need in order to say this kind of thing is this kind of link. And if it's this kind of link, then actually it's not just a link, it's an image or it's an audio or whatever. Or it's a dictionary reference or something like that. The logic comes through this, it's embedded in the actual content. And then we're just kind of, it's the actual sort of style of how you would make content, actually like go and make websites with this thing is actually very different. And there's sort of like separate constituencies that actually is one of the things that came out of that, the retreat was that there were there's like 5 completely separate constituencies here. There's like the people who would be using the apps and the website. There's the people who would be like instantiating them like in a Docker container or something like that. There's the people who would actually be making those apps and websites on top of this thing. There's the people who would be extending it. So they would be writing handlers and transforms. And we can talk about those if you want. And then there's people porting it to other languages. So like 5 completely separate constituencies. They're almost kind of like gradated on levels of kind of how much of a pain it is to have this gain the skills to do that. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, that's an incredibly long-winded way to discuss this.
Well, I'm wondering, I'm actually realizing as we're speaking, I'm an elder millennial. I was around when Web 3.0, I think it was in college, the dream was that Web 3 would be the semantic web, just like these relational structures of basically nouns and verbs and kind of like a graph database where you strip away the HTML and the presentation markup to just reveal the semantic graph of all human knowledge. And it feels like this vision is sort of in the vein of Web 3.0 in the semantic web type of sense, in not Web 3 in this sort of financial internet sense. Would you agree with that? And if so, could we talk a little bit about that vision?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the version numbering the web is a funny thing anyway, if I'm not mistaken.
It's all marketing, let's be honest.
Well, except for the original Web 2.0, if I understand correctly, was like an offhand comment somebody made at like a food camp in 2004, and it just kind of stuck. And then the rest of it is absolutely marketing. But I started working with semantic web tech in like 2006, and it sucked until about 2009, 2010, when it really started to warm up. And then like around 2013 or so is when sort of like pivot to AI, I would say around then started. Like, the people who were making the HTML spec, like the guy in charge of it was working for Google, and he's like, oh, well, we don't need to actually do any embedded metadata because we're just going to AI it, was the attitude at the time. And so there's this kind of antipathy toward it that I find sort of, and I worked on a project a couple of years ago, sort of internationalization strategy project for a client. And one of the head developers was like, semantic web, isn't that dead technology? And it's like, actually, it's kind of finally out, like reaching the slope of productivity in your sort of hype cycle. Like it spent a lot of time in the trough of disillusionment, and it's just finally getting to a place where we can actually use it. And the reason why is the tooling really sucked. Like it really sucked for a really long time, and it's still part of the reason for making this thing is to make the tooling suck less. Like for instance, think about a piece of JSON, right? And the keys that go into the JSON structure, name, rank, serial number, that kind of thing. Those symbols they have to mean something, but like if you don't specify what the symbols refer to on the other side of the equation, I mean, the data description you want to call it, the thing that reads it has no idea what that is. And so all the semantic web does is it says, we're going to take those symbols in the keys of the JSON thing, and we're going to make those URLs. And then we can put that on a website. And the website is the spec for the thing. And, and then we're going to add rules to that so that the actual spec itself is machine readable. So you can just ingest that spec, and then your database just knows what stuff means. It just knows that, like, oh, this is a name and this is a thing. And it, there's Corey, I think, I can't remember his last name, who was one of the guest speakers, was doing climate stuff. He's using RDF. So RDF is Resource Description Framework. That's the kind of meta, structure language framework of the semantic web. So he's using that for climate stuff. And one of the really cool things, and we're thinking down the road here. So DIDs, right? Like distributed identifiers. Well, a DID is a URL, effectively. It's a URI, and it's totally legal to swap out HTTP URIs and stick in DIDs, and you still have the same tech stack, except like you are using a completely different resolver now. You're using a DID resolver instead of an HTTP GET. So that is a really, really exciting proposition to me. Like, I'm imagining, like part of the reason for Intertwingler is to let's get the mechanics of just making content down so that it's costs almost nothing to do the data entry of a structured data object that has the correct structure, and it has URIs in the term so that you can go to the spec, get the spec automatically, stick it in your database, and it knows what it's looking at. And of course, this is all deterministic. There's no AI involved here. This is just, you can use e-waste to compute this stuff. You don't need grids of H100s or whatever the hell. So we could imagine just one day going, just like, the Ethereum fork, just one day being like, okay, we're just using this regime now. All the content stays the same. We just mapped it A to B, 1-to-1, and now we're on this different policy. And I mean, there's people doing that, right? Like this is there's a video that I did for the Summer Protocols where I sort of go over the nitty gritty of this. And one of the things was the elephant in the room is personal knowledge management, right? Like PKM stuff. So, you've got Gordon Brander, for example, doing subconscious, and he's gone and made this whole thing on top of IPFS, which is really interesting. My stuff is kind of complementary to that. Like it's kind of like orthogonal to it almost, where I'm just trying to solve like the problem of how do you do these sort of semantic representations of very, very small, very, very large numbers of very, very small objects that are very, very densely linked together. How do you manage that? And then we can think about how you federate it or whatever later on. I think there's problems sort of inherent to stuff like IPFS, like somebody's got to host it, right? Like, and so I'm sort of taking it from the perspective of I'm going to host my stuff, and if you want to federate it, proxy it, if you want to, we can come up with ways of connecting it to other things later on. But I'm interested in how do I get the data in the case of, say, let's make a PKM on top of this thing, on top of Intertwingler. Similar, it would be like a paint by numbers exercise almost.
So it feels like, sort of part of the upside here is building out and fulfilling that vision of the original semantic web. And then when you have the semantic web of knowledge in a certain domain area, that makes it easier to accomplish whatever your goal, whether your goal is climate or some other domain. And so is that too reductionist, or is that a concise synopsis of why this kind of technology matters?
Definitely going back to like why the semantic web, again, got such a bad rap. And I mean, I think part of it was a PR campaign on the part of Google, and the other part of it was the tooling really sucks. and it still sucks. And so in a great part, Intertwingler exists to make the data entry part of semantic web content less bad, for sure. And yeah, like have something like a demonstrator basically for like, okay, so this, if you had a semantic web engine that also was a regular web engine, it more or less behaves the same way for, if I wanted to make a regular, I liken it to WordPress in the sense that, you should be able to, and we're all like a long ways away from all of the, millions and millions of dollars that have gone into the UI and the packaging and the installation and whatever it has. So we're not even close to that. But the idea of, I want to be able to ship this to like an individual who's only cares about making content. They don't care about, fiddling around with like heavy kind of code. And so there's a way that there's some stuff in the internals that are kind of interesting that we could maybe get to if you're interested in that. But mainly the idea is like, how can we present a system that is going to do the management of, again, persistent addressing, and then the representations of the actual structured data, and do data entry for structured data that just still doesn't exist. Again, you've got like the PKMs. They don't have link types, right? The links aren't typed in PKMs. Intertwingler takes care of backlinks. So like the reason why Intertwingler is called Intertwingler has to do with Ted Nelson, who coined the term hypertext in like 1960. He's the guy responsible for the biggest vaporware project in existence called Xanadu. And his like main beef with the web is like the links only go in one direction. Like, well, what do you need to do to make the links go in both directions? You can do it on your own site. If you promote links to first-class citizens, then the links and the backlinks are just the forward links turned backwards. Going across administrative boundaries, on the other hand, you've got all sorts of problems like telling the truth. How do you trust, and especially these days when the refer header is garbage, and you pretty much have to rely on Google to tell you who links to you. And that's by design, of course. And so, it would be a very interesting thing, like at some point in the future, to be able to have some kind of trust protocol in the backlinking. So it's like, okay, I know that I linked these people. That's worth that information is worth something to somebody. Is there a way to freely exchange that information without too much transaction cost? Like, that is an interesting question.
One of the things I'm sort of realizing from talking to you is that you kind of like speak like an engineer. You're talking from the data structures up, and it's kind of interesting to imagine a counterfactual vision of what the world could be. Oh, I've never thought about how backlinks are just unidirectional. What if we built a web of trust that was back and forth, and what would that web even look like? Who would aggregate that, and what would it mean for the world? But I'm wondering if you could spell out why that matters to the audience, and how this maybe from there, how does this relate to protocols into crypto?
Discovery in general is a problem. And the way that we just find out that stuff exists is the reason why advertising, the whole enterprise of advertising exists. Like, the basic form of advertising is, I am here, right? There's nothing, we're not trying to say buy my product. We're just saying I exist. And, we're not trying to say I'm good. We're not trying to say, and you think about the really kind of austere brand advertising that you see for like some, Mercedes or something like that. And it's just the logo or whatever. And it's like, yes, we're here. That's all they're saying. When you sort of like think about that in a different context of, what is the mechanism that sort of underpins that? And you go back to like the days before the internet, and there was just TV and billboards and whatever. And this like involved like massive media buys. And this was, mediated by a handful of entities who owned all the billboards or owned all the TV stations or what have you. The problem of just discovery, I think, is ameliorated considerably by stuff like backlinks. If I find out that all of these things point to this page, and I do this, and I have done this, it's not as good as it used to be, but you could just comb through the refer headers of your web server logs and go, oh, that's kind of an interesting, what's on this? And you go and you click on it and you find out that there's people discussing your work, and they might be too shy to reach out. And so you show up and you're like, hey guys, I'm the guy who made the thing. And they're like, oh my God, you're the guy who made the thing. And that's that was like what Twitter did, for me circa, 2009 through, last year or whatever. It was this sort of like discovery engine. And so, reliable backlinks, for instance, that are true, is a handy thing. When you type the links, when you actually say the links are typed, so what kind of link is this? What kind of relation is this? You can partition them based on what they are. When you type the objects, you say, well, what kind of thing is this? Well, then you kind of create a reusable object. And then, when you make the URLs durable, you can actually be like, well, if I link to this thing and a year later, it's going to still be there. You can kind of make a guarantee. And that's part of the reason for Intertwingler was what code do I need to write to be able to make these guarantees is kind of the one of the ways of articulating the approach. It's how do I guarantee this for everybody into the, until I die and I lose my domain name, which is that's a problem that has to be dealt with. And there are people working on that for sure. But I'm kind of imagining this kind of, if you've ever read Gödel, Escher, Bach, about the, he's talking about isomorphisms and things that are kind of you've got these structures, semantic structures that move from medium to medium. It's when you see the thing comes into your eye and then it gets processed by your brain, and using antiquated neuroscience, I'm sure, but because he wrote it in 1979. But the sort of idea of being able to take the structure that has the meaning and then just move it to another thing, whole cloth, just be able to move it to a different medium, except it has the same structure. It has the same semantics. We got to get good at that. And we're getting better at it. But I mean, when you think about all of the stuff on archive.org, you've got Vinton Cerf complaining about how the hell are we going to use all this digital data, these data structures and file formats 40 years, 50 years, 100 years into the future. And I think the answer to that is you got to keep it alive somehow. And the way that you keep it alive is you transpose it from one substrate to another. And so making that substrate the best substrate it can be so that you can do that transposition operation at some point in the future, I think is pretty important.
So this brings me kind of back to one of the things that was in your post about Intertwingler, which is you were talking about Alan Kay, who's a prominent computer scientist, positing that there's three modalities of thinking in order of increasing levels of difficulty. There's stories, and then there's arguments, like logical reasoning, and then there's system dynamics. And I feel like one of the things that I'm trying to pull out of you from this conversation is going from the system dynamics of, okay, these are backlinks, this is semantic web, and these are the kind of stories that we're building on top of it, all the kind of systems that we can build on top of it, and the implications for building a more protopian crypto web. So I think there's just something profound there in Alan's statement, but also sort of applying to this conversation as well.
The thing for me, the sort of the real undergirding, reason why, what motivates me to do this stuff and why I care about it, has to do with this basic problem. And I think it's just if there's no story, nobody cares, or at least 95% of the population doesn't care. And And that's just, I mean, I think that just really boils down to training. Like, it's sort of like, if you don't have to worry about system dynamics, you'll never learn about it, because it's like, you don't have to learn about partial differential equations. You're never going to have to need it. But I still think that people still, have this, mental model of you still have a sort of perceptive environment of like, what's happening in the world, and like, what happens if I poke this, and and so on. There's still a rudimentary thing there. And I think like providing the means for people and groups to develop, like basically work out the muscle of understanding system dynamics and understanding, being able to just get a feel for it. I think really is kind of a kinesthetic experience. I think you really have to feel it in your bones. And, it has to be like, something that you did. So it's like, okay, this happened because of me. You hear that, there's like that adage that's like, tell me and I'll probably forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I'll actually care. I probably butchered that, but it's a similar sort of thing. And it's like, well, what tools do we need? I mean, how about what tools do I personally feel like I need in order to communicate the kinds of things that, they sort of like, how do we increase the density really? Well, when I look at, when I look at, it was in the video, it's like, if you have a story, it's like, well, a story can exist within a paradigm, like it can exist within a worldview, but you can't challenge the worldview with a story really. Like, you might be able to get one concept out, if you were really doing some interesting, weird, speculative stuff. But like, the farther you get, like, the less interesting that's going to be to the big middle. And stuff like argumentation, like is really boring. I mean, it's the reason why like Cicero and Aristotle or whatever just, said that, reasoning is actually the worst, it's actually the least effective form of argumentation. And the reason why is because people can just ignore you. Like, I don't like you. I don't care what you're saying. I don't care what your thing is about. Like, I'm la la la. I don't care unless you force me to. So, the reasoning works over the set of people who are already kind of sympathetic and they're like looking for a robust justification to take your side. And then system dynamics, forget about it. And, but when you think of like these massive media franchises, like, whatever, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, these giant media franchises where they just go and they pluck like, oh, what if we took these guys and these, planets and we, whatever, we stuck these together, you got a story. And so you have this kind of like the system has this generative potential and it's a very, very dense, kind of nucleus of dynamics really, that you can mine for stories. And we are just, as a civilization, like just gaining the capability for that. And the way that I kind of feel about it is like, if I was like a painter 3,000 years ago and I wanted to paint a picture, what would I have to do? It's like, okay, I've got to go and I've got to plant a field of flax, and then I'm going to harvest that. And then I got to turn that into linen. And then I got to chop down a tree for the frame. And then I got to go kill a wild boar for the bristles. And then I got to, go and mine the pigments out of the ground and, do chemistry and alchemy to them so that I can get like white and blue and whatever. And it's like this whole, process. And then you get to the end of that and you're like, what the hell was I even going to make? What was I going to paint? I don't remember because I was too busy setting up the, all of the infrastructure for that. And so like, part of the goal of Intertwingler is to set up the infrastructure, make all of that stuff really, really cheap, to make it be, something that people can pick up and use and create crazy stuff with it. And I see it again, like vis-a-vis crypto. One concrete thing is some kind of backlink federated thing for sure. and some kind of, maybe some kind of authentication stuff. I could see in the future being a thing as well. But this could be like the training wheels, for some kind of like dense hypermedia post HTTP web. I wrote a thing, God, it's like probably 2014, 15. I call it the 100-year infrastructure. And it was like where I posited, in 100 years, we're going to still have the web or something at least as good, barring, EMP event or something like that. So, let's get good at it.
There's some really opportunities here that I see colliding with basically making the vision of the semantic web actually real, disintermediating advertising business models, making knowledge available for free without advertising riding along, and along with crypto reimagining the structure of the web. And it's not totally obvious to me what the implications for me as an end user of the web will be, but I think, if it's disintermediating the big tech companies and bringing the advertising surveillance business model down a notch, I think that feels like it fits within our theme of protopian crypto that we have on the GreenPilled podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, it's going to take a while to have it out there in the environment and people using it, and it's like, I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to make a bunch of test apps, demo effectively for it. And there's other people too that have an interest in expressly in this, and they have very clear ideas of what they're going to do with it once they have their hands on it. And again, yeah, like it's let's change the dynamics, change the contours, change the assumptions about working with the web, and really, like I kind of said, like let's kick it off its orbit, and see where it lands with different contours, different dynamics. And it's kind of, again, yeah, it's one of those things that, it's not entirely obvious. Like when you're, I think Venkat had this like too big to nail trope that he had a while back, meme that was the sort of idea where you've got an idea that's just like, if you were going to be able to productize and monetize it like that, you would be able to explain it to everybody. And this is kind of one of those things where, I took a sort of a no hand waving policy a while ago where it's just like, no, I'm just going to make the damn thing. I'm going to make it. And then you can see it once you've got it in your hands.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know that we've only got 5 minutes left, but I'm wondering, as a closing question, if we are maximally successful in realizing this vision, if the Intertwingler is massively used, what does the world look like in 5 or 10 years? Can you paint us a picture of that, not only in systems, but maybe in narratives of what the world looks like?
For one, I think what we would be able to do is we could get away from the idea that that stuff needs to be pinned to a particular programming language, and we're all using protocols. And so like the sort of idea of like, whereas you've got these kind of adherence to Rails and Django and whatever, one of the ideas behind Intertwingler is it's trying to be as agnostic. It's using Ruby right now. There's dumb practical reasons for that. It was either Ruby or Java for something that was used. So there's that aspect of it. Then after that, I think that like, if you were talking 10 years down the road, like the reality of having a server on your phone that has some stuff, and it might bolt up to your VPS or whatever, or even your house, and that's got some stuff. And then that goes and, your phone, your house, your VPS kind of shares a space. And then you might federate on top of that, CDN on top of that. And so you kind of, I'm imagining this kind of almost a soup of information resources that you can still claim. You claim that cryptographically, and you access control it basically by air gapping, selectively saying, this is physically just not, accessible. And you kind of onion skin, and you can kind of have this much higher addressability and visibility into and effectively reusability too of your of content, of information. People are using this to their own personal advantage. And I mean, obviously there's implications of that. There's security stuff that needs to be figured out. But the idea is like, where you've got the single source of truth is a sort of, again, another trope. You can have several sources of different slices of the same truth. And those can be in different places. And they've all got to be somewhere. They just have to be, somewhere. And so the idea is to put those in the safest places they can be. The high availability, low sensitivity information can be out in the cloud. You don't care. The high, the stuff that, is itinerant will be on your phone. The stuff that's in your, that has very high security will be air gapped in your house, like that kind of thing, is something that I'm definitely imagining. It's in the DNA. And then, delegate certain functions to other things, like delegate certain verbs to entire other, what if there's a service provider that provides some particular computation, like just utility compute? Let's think of an interface for that. What does that protocol look like? How do you pay for it? So there's all sorts of stuff, but it's like, you got to kind of get over the hump of like the actual onerous part of building websites, which, into, something that costs you virtually nothing. And I think like the biggest part of that is the stupid URLs. It's in the document I wrote, it's like, it's the URL, stupid. Tim Bako suggested that I call the whole essay that, and I was like, I can't do that. We'll make it a section.
Well, yeah. It's really quite interesting. I am curious to see where you're taking it from here. If people want to learn more, how do they find more about you or your work?
So, DorianTaylor.com. There's DorianTaylor.com/Summer of Protocols. I have it on the front page still. That's hyphenated. Summer-of-protocols. I am on Farcaster. I am on Mastodon. I am on Blue Sky. I am, of course, on Twitter still. Those are all linked off of my site in the footer. So I'd say start at the website. And just, if you want to search for Dorian Taylor, I'm just Dorian on Farcaster. So that and the standard places.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast and explaining your work to us, Dorian. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, you just heard from Dorian Taylor. I am excited about them for the amount that he has bent my thinking into thinking about the semantic web, fighting the enshittification of the web, and what a different web could look like. Thanks for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. Again, we are featuring people who are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto and the web to bring more positive sum digital systems to the world, like Dorian Taylor, like the Intertwingler. If you value our work, please make an offering to our algorithmic overlords by subscribing, rating, and reviewing. And please remember to share this episode with a friend who might enjoy it. I will see you next time. Thanks again for listening. Peace.